Good afternoon. Welcome to the Wednesday, March 4th, 2015 Energy and Environment Committee. We are here with Mr. Blumenfield, patiently awaiting Mr. Koretz. It's expected that Mr. Weezar and Mr. Labange will not be joining us. So let's see if we can establish a quorum so that we can dispense with these items. So let's begin with item number 1, Mr. Prieto.
Mr. Chair, item number 1 relates to CAO report relative to proposed agreement with the Hatch Company for wastewater collection system services. We have from the Bureau of Sanitation, Fernando Gonzalez and Wilson Poon from the CAO's office.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Item 1 on the agenda is a CAO report which is recommending that the Council authorize the Bureau to execute a 10-year contract with Hawk to install and maintain flow gauges in our city sewer system. These flow gauges will deliver information on the volume, the velocity, the depth of the wastewater in our sewers. And this information is critical for us to, number 1, bill our contract agencies, also to assess the capacity of our sewers, and also plan for future capacity needs of the sewers, as well as, I think, determine where groundwater may be infiltrating our sewer system. The Bureau had previously attempted to purchase and install these devices on our own. We learned that we didn't have the expertise to maintain the devices, so with this contract, Hawk will basically install, maintain, repair, update, calibrate. They'll do everything for us and deliver the data for us, and they're guaranteeing us a 95% uptime. The cost of the contract is $13 million. And funding will be provided through the Sewer Construction and Maintenance Fund. There's sufficient funds for the first year of the contract, and future year funding will be provided through the budget process.
Very good. I've got just a couple of questions on this. How many sewer spills occur annually, more or less?
We have a good afternoon, Councilmember Blumenfield. We have made a huge reduction on the number of sanitary sewer overflows. Right now, at the whole year, the number of spills is what we used to have in a month, about 10 years ago. So it's a little over 100 sanitary sewer overflows from what we used to have per month. This is a result of our aggressive implementation of our collection system settlement agreement, activities that we're carrying and adopting as a policy legacy. So basically, this program will keep us in this, keep our fingers to the pulse of the system, and will identify the choke points, anomalies, and it will keep us from reducing further the number of sanitary sewer overflows.
Will there be any impact to the residents? Will they feel, as you're deploying this project, will the community feel anything? Will they notice any difference in their service?
No, sir, because all these devices are primarily installed in what we call the primary sewer collection system. If you think of an analogy of the transportation system, just like local streets and arteries and freeways, our collection system, we have the smaller pipes that collect the wastewater from our residents and ratepayers, and then it goes into what we call the primary system, which is like the arteries. They collect these smaller pipes, and then it goes into our freeway system, if you will. These are trunk lines and outfalls. So all of these devices will be installed into either the primary or the artery system or on the trunk lines.
And how is the data collected? I mean, I understand that you're going to have gauges and a network, but will folks have to go and read the gauges on site, or is the information transmitted to a centralized location? How do you?
It is, there is a sensor that it's installed not inside the pipe, but right above inside into a maintenance hole. And you have two types of measurements. One is for the surface velocity, is a radar, and then another one that measures the depth. And with the combination of the surface velocity and the depth, there's a data logger in the same unit that calculates the rest of the hydraulic entities, and then there is a cellular component that transmits that into a web server, and we have access to that web server, and then we use that data for analysis.
Very good. Mr. Blumenfield?
Yeah. Up until 2011, we were doing this work ourselves, and then we started contracting out. Is this something that have we been teaching our employees to do? Is it something that makes more sense to contract out? What is the future plan in terms of who does the work and how?
Okay, Councilman, historically, this work has been performed by contracting companies. Back in 2000, we purchased some gauges, and we went ahead and we installed them, and we were maintaining them at first. But unfortunately, the program fell victim of the hiring freezes of those years, and attrition, and retirement, and transfers. So the priority was given to other activities in the collection system, like maintenance of the pumping plants and the air treatment facilities. So pretty much the flow monitoring program that we have fell into pretty much disrepair, to the point that in 2007, we were not collecting data at all. So one of the requirements of the settlement agreement was to have a computer-assisted hydrodynamic model so that we could simulate flows into our sewer network. So we have to contract out for the calibration of that model. And then we decided that it was in best interest to continue having an outside vendor. Now, the contract has a provision for a technology transfer. Part of our discussions with the staff and the unions was to have provisions for a technology transfer between the contractor and our staff. And then there is a clause there's a clause for us to, if we decide to purchase and acquire some of these units. And should we decide in the future to maintain some of these units ourselves.
So what's the status of that transfer?
Well, as soon as we get the contract in place, starting the first year will be the installation and the rolling out of the flow monitoring program. The technology transfer will take place from year 2 on and on. And then we need to make a decision, because this is a 5-year contract with a 5-year renewal. So as we approach the 5th year, we're going to sit down, see the status of the technology transfer, and see what our best options would be at that time.
The contract was started in 2011?
No, the contract, we don't have right now. We have only a few flow monitoring stations pretty much scattered around the system to provide us just the vital information on what's going on in the collection system. That's why we are much in need for these other units to come online.
Great. I just want to make sure we're doing it the most important work, that we're doing it in the most cost-effective manner in terms of our own labor force. It's something that we can do. It's often cheaper to have us do it, and it makes sense for us to do it and figure out that balance. But it sounds like that's moving in the right direction. So, great, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We will move this to the City Council as a communication to approve the CAO's request for the Bureau of Sanitation to enter into contract with the Hawk Company for personal services associated with the wastewater collection system as specified. If we get a quorum, then we'll ask Mr. Koretz to see if he'll join on, and we'll make it an official action, but we'll go ahead and communicate it at this point.
Thank you very much.
Item number 2.
Item number 2, Department of Water and Power and City Attorney reports and ordinance relative to the establishment of a joint powers authority for water financing. You have Phil Leiber from Department of Water and Power, David Arano, and Mark Davis from the CAO's office.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Phil Leiber, representing Department of Water and Power.
Richard Tom at the City Attorney's Office, representing Department of Water and Power.
And I'm Mark Davis with the CAO's office.
Okay. So we are here today to talk about our request for the formation of a joint powers authority. This would be an agency that would allow us to finance needed water projects at a much lower cost to our customers. In one sense, we already have a similar agency on the power side. We've had it for over 30 years, called the Southern California Public Power Authority. This would be similarly named as the Southern California Public Water Authority. The key difference between these two entities would be we can take advantage of some state legislation that was passed last year that would allow us to finance water projects really at a very low cost. And we can do that by obtaining a AAA rating on the projects and avoiding the need to collect something called debt service coverage, we would collect from our ratepayers only the cost of servicing the bonds, not an additional cushion on top of that. And the bottom line benefit to all of this is 5 years from now, our rates could be about 3% lower than they otherwise would be without this financing tool. So that's why we want to proceed with it. It's really for one purpose, to finance projects at the lowest possible cost and to save ratepayers money.
Very good. Anything from the CAO?
No.
How about the Office of the Ratepayer Advocates? I've got some questions, but I'd like to hear the presentations, and then we've got some conversation that we need to have.
Fred Pickle, Executive Director, Office of Public Accountability, Ratepayer Advocate. We like the word save money. So the underlying premise of this is correct. We just have to make sure in the governance process that the projects and programs going into this receive appropriate review, not just in the context of the financing, but as the projects and programs are included in into the program, for fear that projects that are not attractive from the ratepayers are put in without appropriate review at the DWP board and at council.
So let me just jump in then. So I agree with you, Dr. Pickle. Saving money is good. I'm actually very excited about the financing mechanism that this would give us. But it's my understanding that the way it works, this securitization, the ability to have this JPA, it really is an off-the-books financing scheme that we're putting together with the line item on the ratepayer's bill dedicated solely to servicing the debt on this particular financing mechanism. That's how it would work, right?
That is a good summary.
So actually, so as a consumer, then I get my bill and I will see my water rate, my electricity rate, my sewer charge. There's there's 4 right now. What's the 4th? Trash charge. And so now there would be a 5th line that would be the item that would securitize, would be the payment for the securitization mechanism that you've got here.
That's one possible presentation. We haven't got to the point yet where we've absolutely designed, here's what the bill is going to look like. There are basically 2 options. What you laid out would be one. It could really just be funding that's collected by Department of Water and Power and remitted to another agency, and you could show it in a separate section of the bill. The alternative treatment would just be to show it as another component in the water section of the bill. But substantively, it would work the same either way, in that the money doesn't stay with Department of Water and Power. We're just a collecting agent, and it gets remitted to the JPA to service the bonds.
So again, the exciting part is that it's a way for us to lower the financing costs of these capital projects. The part that I struggle with an awful lot, and we shared this, and I think it's important for us to talk about it out loud a little bit, is how is it then that when you all represent a rate increase and we have to go through the board and then subsequently to the city council, how do we measure what the true rate increase is going to be? So if we give you all the authority and we ratify it, we'll get to the governance part in a second, but presuming that it gets ratified by the elected leadership, what could have started out as a 3% water rate increase really effectively is some other percentage, more than that, because the numbers, I mean, I don't know how you sort of reconcile all of that, because you'll have presented something for your on-the-books needs, and then we have this off-the-books mechanism. So how do you ultimately account for what the true rate is to the consumer?
Let me give you 2 ways in which we would do that, and we try to be absolutely as transparent as we can be when we're talking about here's a project, here's what it's going to cost, and here's what the impact on rates will be. And the projects that we bring to our board presently, the significant projects, do have that rate impact, because we really don't want there to be any disconnect. If you like the project, but down the line there's going to be a rate impact. We really want to connect those. And the way that's connected is in 2 ways. Number one, when we're going to be presenting longer-term financial plans, we're going to have a projection of here's the programs we're going to be spending money on, here's the costs, and here's what the rate impacts are going to be. We will be having such a discussion in the coming months. And when we have that discussion, we would be in a position to say, we are assuming that we have access to this lower cost financing technique. If we don't, we would show a separate projection. So we can show right there that if we have access to this, rates will be lower. But more importantly, the legislation that allowed this form of securitization actually requires that when we make an application for this type of financing, that we have to demonstrate it is a lower cost alternative. And we would do that at the time of each financing by saying, we're going to borrow X number of dollars, say $300 million. If we use our traditional cost of debt, directly issued DWP bonds, it's going to cost us this much in debt service, it's going to have this much rate impact. If instead we use this approach, the cost is going to be lower and the rate impact is going to be lower. So each step along the way, there's going to be transparency and choices and a demonstration that this is the most cost-effective way to go.
And so to your point about choices, and let me begin by saying I absolutely commend you all for, one, getting Mr. Nazarian to run the legislation, and two, to try to figure out how to minimize the cost of what is, I think, incredible service that this utility does to its residents. I firmly believe that. But, our responsibility on the council is the setting and making of rates, essentially. I mean, the proposals move from the utility to the mayor's board of Department of Water and Power Commissioners, and then ultimately to the council. So I'm thinking ahead, if we're having a rate conversation, which we intend to do in the next couple of months, the proposal could say that our rate increase is going to be this amount for a couple of years, but then the ability to have the council and the board and your recommendation then do more issuances. Now I feel like the rate is something else than what it was that was deemed approved. So how do you reconcile all of that? Because I can't imagine that it would be ideal, but it must be very difficult, so that, let's say at the beginning of 1 year, we know what we're intending to do, but we realize that we've got to switch gears. Let's say we've got to do more of X, Y, and Z, and as you're looking at all the ways to sort of finance them, there's already been decisions made and communications to the ratepayer about what their rates are going to be, and that can really get changed very quickly by just us issuing additional debt on the off-the-book mechanism. So now the rate really is not what it is that we had previously communicated. How will that construct look so that we're being more than transparent, but predictable in terms of what it is that we're saying our rates are going to be?
Well, Councilmember, I think you're pointing out an issue that really exists independent of whether we do this type of financing or not, in that the best laid plans can always change. We do intend to lay out a longer-term rate projection, to have that discussion, and there's two benefits to that. Number one, the department really needs some stability, understanding, what do we need to accomplish, what it's going to cost, and there's a fairly elaborate contracting process we have to go through to get this work done. So we need the predictability, and further, we believe the customers need the predictability, particularly business customers. How are rates going to change over the coming years? So we think that there's value on both sides in having a financial plan that's transparent, people understand what's coming around the corner. Now, that said, things can always change. There may be a need for new projects that we hadn't anticipated, projects that we planned on that get delayed. So one is always taking those things into account and adjusting the plans to some degree. There will always be a mechanism to make those mid-course corrections. So, for example, if we do talk about a longer-term rate plan and potentially approval of rates over a longer period of time, there will nonetheless be the annual budget process that will allow for true-ups. There's also discussion about having a check-in where the council would, and the ratepayer advocate would, after a couple of years say, are things on track? And if not, what changes need to be made? So I think there'll always be an opportunity to make necessary corrections along the way.
And so I think that's sort of where I'm trying to understand how to define what these corrections are going to be. So today it's reported in one of the dailies that we are going to, as a result of pass-through mechanisms that are built into our rates, we will be correcting the rates to account for the higher cost of water. To me, that seems like a reasonable correction. But to have potentially off the books, essentially 20% of the weight of the bill being able to be there as capacity for us to finance, that to me is more than a correction. That to me is now a very heavy element of that bill and ultimately that rate. So to me, it's more than true up at this point. And so I want to figure out how to account for that so that when we are doing the planning and communicating to our ratepayers, that we can say with some confidence that, there might be some variability, but there, in my opinion, shouldn't be the ability for us to finance an awful lot and not have communicated that in the rate-making process. That's where I get a little concerned about the proposal. So I guess as a statement, let me sort of ask you then, from a governance perspective, how do we, at least as it's currently proposed, how would this be sort of communicated and governed by the board and the city council as you're currently proposing it?
Well, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for check-in and for discussion and for the council to exercise as much control as you'd like. The way the package came to you at present, the decision whether to make an application for financing through the JPA did rest with the board. We didn't write it that the council would also have to approve that financing. We're very open to that. If you'd like to have that as an explicit act, that's not a problem. So we have some language that would provide for that as well. Our thinking was that given that you always have Section 235 or 245 actions, that if you wanted to step in and review that board action, you could do that. But even apart from that, we had intended to make it very clear that we would be planning to make use of this form of financing when we talk about our long-term rates, when we present our budget each year for council review. We would be planning on doing a certain amount of bond funding. We'd show the breakdown between DWP-issued bonds versus JPA-issued bonds. So in any event, we plan on having a lot of transparency. But it's not a problem if the council would also like to explicitly act on that financing, and we would present a package that says, here's the type of projects that we're going to fund, here's the financing amount, and here's the rate impact. So we're entirely open to that.
So it might be easier for us not to act in the process, but I think we have a charter obligation, if I'm not mistaken, on the rates. So if we were talking true up, then I understand where, for the sort of onesie twosies, we don't want to necessarily slow down a process. But this to me is a lot more and substantive than that. So it would be my very strong desire to want to have the council act and affirm whatever the board sort of moves to us, just like we would with the SCAPA financing, because to me that's sort of what the matter of course is today. SCAPA, when you all do I shouldn't say the financing, the contracts,
yes,
which embedded in that is the financing. So if we don't approve the contract, presumably you can't sort of go and do the bond issuance. To me, we've got to figure out how to fix this governance aspect of it, because I don't think that the council should be let me do it in the affirmative. The council has to be a part of that process in my mind. And so I'd like to let Mr. Blumenfield weigh in here. I've got some more comments and questions, but let me give my colleague, Mr. Blumenfield, an opportunity.
Sure, no, and I appreciate what you're saying and agree conceptually that I like the idea of affirmatively having the council have that role, that explicit role, even though we already have it through the process if we wanted to pull it in. So there's governance issues and there's financing issues. First, just quickly on the financing side of it, is there any downside financially to this form versus traditional bond funding? Is there flexibility? Is there anything that you could think of? I mean, I can't think of something, but maybe there is something.
We're not really seeing a lot of downside. We're not the first out of the gate to do something like this. There have been other utilities on the power side that have used securitization very successfully. It was done here in California by the investor-owned utilities back around year 2000, 2001. More recently, it's been done by LIPA. It's been done by Hawaiian Electric. So it's been done very successfully. We would actually be the first on the water side to make use of it if we go forward this fall.
I mean, whenever you securitize something, you're putting some assets theoretically at risk, right?
Well, that's one form of securitization where you're actually pledging an asset. Here, what's put up as collateral is just the revenue stream. So the bondholders have a right to a revenue stream that's viewed as very secure, and that's one of the reasons it qualifies for a very high rating, because it's clean, it goes directly to them.
So it just seems like better rate. Clearly we have the revenue stream. There's no downside on the financing. Do you agree also, Mr. Strickland?
I guess the one thing I would add is the transactions have to be structured correctly. There's a lot of boxes that have to be checked. The rating agencies have to review them. We still have to go through all that due diligence. Now, our advisors, our counsel, our financial experts are going to help us through that process, and we think we'll get through it successfully. But to get an issuance such as this rated as AAA, to get the benefits in terms of having it treated off balance sheet and the debt service coverage requirements not being included from a rate making standpoint, those are things we think we can achieve, but they're not 100% guaranteed. The only downside would be if we didn't achieve those, then we haven't achieved all the benefits that we'd hoped for. But we're no worse off than just DWP directly issuing the debt. So from that standpoint, I don't really see a downside. There's a possibility we don't get quite all the benefits that we'd hope for.
The simple scenario where things might not work would be if we get started and start putting projects in, and Burbank never finds a project that it likes to put in. After a period of time, it may have to be consolidated in the accounting process and counted against the overall debt, and we would ultimately the financing cost would be the same as if we did it ourselves, minus the fees necessary for the securitization.
Because we have their piece of it.
Because, but they never provide a piece. If Burbank never joins in specific projects.
These are some of the considerations that when the rating agencies look at these transactions, when the auditors look at the transactions, they like some assurance that the JPA is actually an independent entity. It's not controlled by just one member. So that's something we have to keep in mind.
And what's the breakdown on the JPA in terms of voting membership?
Right now, there's just two initial members, so City of Los Angeles and the City of Burbank. Now, over time, we can add additional members, and we think that other cities and other utilities would have an interest in joining. But in terms of getting this operation up and off the ground quickly so that we can make use of it, hopefully this fall, we thought it was cleanest just to get it started with two members.
On that point, though, so the members that are actually voting, as proposed now, it's not the City Council. It would be the mayor's board of DWP commissioners.
The member representatives who would have voting rights at the JPA, as it's structured currently, it's just the general manager of each utility.
Okay.
Right, or whoever, I mean, I guess that's who you appoint. So it would be the general manager of each utility would comprise the membership of the JPA, and they would each have an equal vote.
They would each have an equal vote, and that was deemed important to address that issue that I had just mentioned, that from a governance standpoint, it's not in our interest to have it dominated by one entity. So equal votes was
Explain that again. Having our interest dominated by LA always makes a lot of sense to me.
Normally that would be, normally that would be a good thing. But in this case, it's getting to the point that Dr. Pickle mentioned, which is it's important to have this entity be seen as truly an independent entity, not just a financing arm of Los Angeles. So structuring it such that it has equal voting members, it's not dominated by any one entity, that was important to achieve these objectives, that ultimately we want the rating agencies to assign a AAA rating. We want them not to require debt service coverage on this debt so that we can help keep rates lower. So to achieve all of those objectives, this has been structured in this way.
Now, so Burbank finances something that they've got going. We're now on, that JPA is now on the hook.
It's interesting language that you used, on the hook. In fact, all of this has been carefully structured so that an entity that's not participating in a project is not on the hook in any sense. So if it's just LA issuing bonds for its projects, Burbank is not on the hook for that. If Burbank would do a transaction issuing bonds for their projects, LA is not in any way on the hook for that. So it was carefully structured to provide for separation and no cross indemnities or exposure to liabilities of the other side.
Kind of goes against the idea that you have to have two independent people who are, because they don't have any skin in the other game. So they're each going to defer to each other on on the projects that their own entity wants to do.
From a voting standpoint, a majority has to authorize moving forward with a project. But only the participants in that project have financial exposure to it. And that is structured by having a separate limited liability company for each financing, so that there's no liability or exposure to other projects or any claims or anything of that nature. And we've had lots of good legal advice on this, outside counsel, city attorney's office, and our financial experts.
I mean, it sounds great, and in some ways too good to be true, but we've had all the legal folks look at it, but it just, some of those bells go off in my head about how it's structured and how it's perceived in terms of its independence. But that's not my role in this. I just see it as at the moment as a way to lessen the rates on it, and that's a good thing. And as much as we can use it productively, that's very positive.
You know, I agree. I enjoy the sort of the flexibility that you will have as a result of this, but what makes me uncomfortable is we have to, I think, we, the city council, have to help in the authority process, so it's not just run by a mayor and his or her commission. You have to, in my opinion, come back and check with the council, so this way, when it is time for them to vote, they move very swiftly and the financing is easy. So to the governance piece of it, the mayor's board of DWP commissioners, they took an action on the language that doesn't reflect having the council in all of this. So I think we could ask them to amend it, assuming that my colleague here, and Mr. Prieto, you're going to have to help me here because we don't have a quorum. I don't know how we proceed, but other than holding the item and waiting for the board to amend it so that the council has a role in all of this going forward, because we have a fantastic general manager today, but imagine if you had one that was more of a cowboy, say, and deemed particular projects very important and started just running up the credit card. That to me is a little frightening, a lot frightening. So before we sort of talk about how we fix it, help me understand what type of projects we're talking about here that would be eligible for this type of financing mechanism.
Certainly. So the department has a lot of work ahead of it, a lot of different types of projects, but we think of them really in three categories. There's addressing the needs on the local infrastructure, the water pipes, getting the water to the customers. That's one major category. Another is mandated projects, so things like covering the reservoirs, changing how the water is treated. It's a state or federal mandate that says you have to do this. That's a whole category of work. The third is projects that can be a bit more discretionary but nonetheless very important, and that's local water supply projects, so stormwater capture and recharge, conservation, groundwater cleanup. Those are three major categories. This financing approach, the rate reduction bonds, also known as securitization, under the legislation passed last year, allows us to finance the latter two categories of projects. So any mandated project or anything to lessen our reliance on imported water, i.e. enhancing our local water supply. Both of those categories of projects can be funded. And if you just look at the overall capital budget of the department, that's at least 50 to 60% of our overall capital needs can be financed through this approach.
So there has to be a nexus to water supply, water security? Or is it so discretionary, for example, that if the Los Angeles River, which is very important to all of us, which in my opinion, at least the way it's currently engineered, doesn't have a significant water security or supply role, this fund wouldn't be able to be used to improve the river for, let's say, active recreation or some other fantastic and necessary sort of thing, but this bucket of money would not be able to be used in that situation.
Let me make one distinction. The JPA could be used to finance projects kind of the same way that SCAPA does today with power projects. What you couldn't do, unless it met one of those two qualifications, mandated or local water supply, is you can't use the securitization approach. So just a project, if the city wanted to enhance recreation on the river, unless that was a mandate from the state or federal government, or unless you could demonstrate that that enhanced our availability of local water, then that would not qualify for AB 850 securitization.
Okay. But so how is that, who's the arbiter of that decision? Who decides that it really does, other than sort of your experts, that it is for water supply, water security?
There is actually a role for the state in this. The legislation that I made reference to, AB 850, actually provides for a state agency to review each financing application and to approve it, and that's the California Pollution Control Authority. So after we would make, when we make an application for financing to the JPA, it has to go for approval to that state agency. So they would review a number of findings, and they would have to determine that the projects intended did qualify.
As we're beginning to look at the whole cycle of water, we're working with sanitation more, we're working with the Department of Engineering more. Would they be able to access this financing as well if they were promoting additional mandate support or water security supply, et cetera? If they met the criteria, could sanitation then say, DWP, we need $250 million because we're going to do to fund the stormwater plan, for example, that they've been circulating largely with working with you all? Would they have the ability to access these funds?
The legislation was written in such a way that it refers to water agencies. So it doesn't specify that it has to be a water agency that serves only potable water. It's kind of broadly defined water agency. So a sewer agency is a water agency. So it's possible they could make use of this JPA and the AB 850 legislation as well. But again, it would still have to be a mandated project or something that enhances local water supply.
Sure. So I'm thinking just out loud here, MS4 compliance, it's water supply, it's treat and discharge, it's a big price tag. Chiefly, although there's a lot of coordination, but chiefly in the domain of the Bureau of Sanitation, they are not inside of our DWP rate-making conversation, but their additional if they were to be able to access these dollars, that additional increase in rates would be borne by the ratepayer, but they would never have had the opportunity to have been in the conversation about rates. But that could very well happen, though, right? Sanitation could access the money.
Would it have to be securitized then by a line item in the sanitation charge? Or could you do it that way instead of doing it
there have been
on this line, so a separate line?
On a separate line. So if in that example, the sanitation doing something, it wouldn't be securitized by your water rate or your power rate, but it would be by your sewage rate.
Those are the type of considerations that one would have to look into. Now, I have to admit, coming and sitting in front of you today, I've approached this from how does this assist Department of Water Power's customers. We know that it may potentially have use beyond DWP, but I'm not the expert and I haven't explored all of those opportunities. My counterpart at Sanitation, I believe, will probably be in a position to begin asking the question, could this be of value to their customers as well?
Sure, and I think ultimately it'd be of value to your customers, because if we're buying less water, because we're doing more with stormwater, dealing with the MS4 sort of liability out there, that's good for all of us. But from an accounting perspective, that conversation, that good, isn't embedded in our rate conversation. And that's where I get really sort of nervous about all of this. Terribly excited about the cost savings, but I just, from a governance perspective, which I guess brings us to that now, how do we get the board to get caught up with having the council participate? Because my thinking is that we hold the item and then have or communicate to the board. Mr. Prieto, what do you think?
Mr. Chair, Blumenfield, you could handle this matter a variety of different ways. You know, you can the traditional way is to forward it to the council, and the council take an action either up or down on the matter. The other way, the more kind of practical and inclusive way to deal with this at this point would be to hold the matter in committee. You've already provided some guidance to the staff as to what you'd like to have added within the JPA ordinance. Have them draw up the language with that language. Have them share that with the board and run it through if need be, and then have the matter back here within an expeditious time frame.
So also understanding that we don't have a quorum, I think that makes it for a cleaner sort of deal. So if unless you all have some questions of us, I think you get sort of at least what my concerns are. I hope, Mr. Blumenfield, you share the ones that I've talked about a little bit, and I'm fascinated by the financing mechanism. I think it's fantastic and great that it's legal. I just want to make sure that we're being sort of as genuine to the rate conversation as possible going forward. And I want to understand if the sanitation and others can help us improve the resilience of the city with this technique that will save us some money. So I think let's do that unless you all have any additional feedback for us.
So just as a point of clarification, so it'll be continued in committee until the board comes back to you?
Yeah, we'll hold it here, have the board send us revised language that includes the city council in the governance aspect of it. I know that we're included vis-a-vis the Prop 245 thing, but more affirmatively, as a matter of course, it should come to us when we, like we do SCAPA. I think that's probably better on a contractual basis than it is on a bond issuance basis, because I don't know that you need us to slow you down in that role. So maybe we look at SCAPA as an example of how we do that.
All right, thank you.
I'd love when it comes back to get, this wouldn't affect our ability to do this, but to get it maybe sanitation up here as well, to see some of these creative ideas about how sanitation could use this and whether or not that could be through directly in the ratepayer subset of things, or if there's a way to push that off into a separate sanitation charge, but still use the JPA mechanism and the securitization and the rate decrease. It would be good to flesh that out a little bit. Again, that's not going to be a make or break for doing this. We want to do this, but it'd be good to understand that.
And we can certainly begin those conversations with sanitation, although I should point out that in any event, we would be coming back to talk more with you about the specifics of the financing transaction, which is distinguishable from my standpoint from actually just forming the JPA. Kind of the first order of business is get the JPA formed, and then we can work through and have lots of discussions about which projects, exactly how they're funded, what the cost recovery looks like. So those things are still ahead of us.
Excited and getting
To echo on that point, I think one of the challenges here, because it is a brand new entity and a brand new legislation, we're first out of the gate on it. I think part of what we're faced with is exploring this with the banks and with everyone else, and part of this is just the uncertainty around some of these issues. So I think the desire would be to get the JPA formed, to be in a mode where we do a first transaction, and then be in a mode to address many of the issues as we grow, if you will, whereas we just don't know some of the answers to these things yet because the banks are still sorting this out with us.
Sure. And on the bill, can you make it the Nazarian line? He's the author, is that correct?
He is.
Correct.
Yeah, he should be paid all due respect. Very good. Let's go ahead and hold the item in committee, and we will wait to hear from you in short order. There are no cards on the item, so let's go ahead and go to item number 3, please.
Item number 3.
Thank you.
Department of Water and Power CEO, City Attorney reports an ordinance relative to authorizing design build criteria for a contract to be let using a competitive sealed bid proposal method relative to the Scattergood Generating Station Unit 3 demolition project.
I'm John Dennis, I'm the Director of Power System Planning and Development. This particular item sets the criteria for evaluating proposals using the Charter Section 371B. It also, for design build criteria, the particular project here is at our Scattergood Generating Station, which is just down the road from LAX. This would be phase 2. We're currently under phase 1 of a very large project to replace that generating capacity. This particular site is a very tight site. We've equated the project that we're doing there as like replacing the engine on an airplane while you're still flying it. The team so far is on schedule for that first phase to be done by the end of this year, and that's replacing about 3/5 of the particular generation capacity. There's about 850 megawatts comes out of the plant. Right now they're putting in about 550 megawatts to replace that. This piece here then is once that is generating power and operational, this particular project then will allow us to remove the old equipment that was there and demolish that site and then prepare the site for the next power block to go in. So these steps would lead to the evaluation of the proposer who demolishes that particular generating unit. A lot of care it has to go into place so that we keep all the power coming out of that facility, and they do that very carefully. But basically, then we'll have 2 years of demolition followed with 3 years of construction for the new project. So overall, where we're heading with this is to reduce emissions, increase our fuel efficiency, integrate renewables, and then reduce the use of our ocean water for cooling. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
What are some of the key timelines that we are going to see here soon? I know that we were effective, I should say the department was effective, we were in the legislature at the time, to get some relaxation on the deadlines for the once through cooling mandates. Where are we sort of in line with all of that? What are those dates, and when will we sort of get all of this done?
Certainly. Inside the Los Angeles basin, the department and the city has 4 large generating stations inside the city, 1 in the San Fernando Valley and 3 that are along the coast. Prior to 1994...
sorry, we have a once-through cooling facility in the San Fernando Valley?
No, we have 4 generating facilities.
I'm sorry.
The one in San Fernando Valley...
Wow!
Yeah, the ocean doesn't go that far. But we do use water for cooling in there. There's 4 that are our generating facilities. One of them is there in the San Fernando Valley, and they use the cooling tower for that structure. The other 3 along the coast use ocean water. The ocean water passes through and cools the units. In 1994, we were using 2 billion gallons of ocean water a day. Today, because of the retrofits and the progress that we've made, we're down to about 1.3 billion gallons. By the end of this year, when this project is finished, we'll be at about 1 billion gallons of water per day. So we're about halfway there. Our target originally with the state was to be done by 2019. We looked at the schedule and the needs for reliable power still and integrating all the other projects, renewables and such that we're layering in. We've talked about our integrated resource plan. We had appealed and we had asked for a 2045 date to do all that, these retrofits. And in negotiating with the State Water Board, came to a mutual agreement that 2029 would be a workable date. Barring anything from going wrong, we'd have to make all the right steps in the right sequences along the way. And so this is just working that plan and the details of that plan. So when this particular this site has been demolished, we build in that particular unit. At the end of 2021, we'll have only 2 more plants to take off ocean water for cooling. Will be about a quarter of that ocean water remaining, so about 250 million gallons of water a day by 2022 or so. So we're making great headway. The current projects are just moving right along as scheduled. So instead of using ocean water for cooling, we'll just be using like the equivalent of radiators in your car, that kind of effect.
And so it's a combined cycle system? So rapid fire and start, and is it, is this sort of the best, latest technology that we've got there?
It is. Yeah. It's right now, some of this technology that we're using, we're having a mix of generation capacity at that site. So some of it is a combined cycle that's going in today, a combination of gas turbines and steam turbines. But then there are also some very fast starting units that are going in called a simple cycle instead of combined cycle. And those are almost like a jet engine. Those run and will start up very fast, very fuel efficient, but are also low in their emissions. That technology was not available about 6 years ago.
So it's like having a small peaker on site with your combined cycle.
It's a large peaker.
That's right. Okay, but I mean not as sort of, it's a lot more efficient.
Yes, that's correct.
Very good. Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, so this is done through a competitive sealed proposal?
That's correct.
And help me understand why, because that's not usually the way it's done, right?
All of our large projects that we've done on these repowerings and such has used this particular mechanism. So for the last 6 projects since early 2000, we've used this approach. This particular one, so it sets the criteria to evaluate it. You want to be very careful that you're not just selecting only on price, price is evaluated, but you want to make sure that the contractor has capabilities for demolition. They have demonstrated some experience with regards to power facilities of working inside those, especially because these will be the people who are there that will be disconnecting operating systems, cutting, capping pipe, cutting and capping and isolating electrical equipment in an existing and operating facility. It won't be just like coming in to a vacated building and just knocking it down. So there's some very large structures. These structures are about 12 stories tall in size.
Is there any downside to using this competitive sealed proposal versus more of a traditional open?
The advantage is that you're able to, again, get qualified, capable contractors. So far, this process has been very successful for the city in using this particular approach.
Robert Roth in the CIO's office. To expand on what Mr. Dennis has said, not having that ability would limit their options for negotiating particular terms, clarifying complicated matters regarding this type of project. So in the past, as well as this project, it's been seen as an advantage to have that ability.
The trade-off is on price, and that if you have an open process, you can ratchet the price down better, but if you have the sealed process, you've got more negotiating. Help me understand the trade. There's always a trade-off. And so when I ask what the downside is, I'm trying to understand the pros versus the cons. So help me understand the trade-offs. I'm not saying it's a bad choice at all. I'm just trying to understand.
The other piece to this would be is that we have identified in some level of detail all the basic steps that need to happen. However, we have not prepared very detailed specifications about how they will approach that. Some contractors can take different approaches towards how they will approach that work. This allows that liberty for them to come and show that they have competent, capable people to knock down a large building, to remove hazardous materials, to show the sequence of events of how they will approach that work. So instead of just simply saying take down this box and give us a price for it, it will require them to come in and demonstrate how they will approach that and the steps that will be done, and that is in the evaluation process to show that they have the capability both for safety, for the construction capabilities and such. So it does require and put the onus on them to show that information as opposed to just a single price. The concern about a single price at this point would be is a contractor could potentially show you that price or what that number is and then come back later with sizable amount of change orders afterwards. And because the site is an older site, there's quite a few unknowns or uncertainties are in there, and this is more conducive for the...
This is because they're talking about proprietary information? I mean, because why couldn't you ask that on an open bid? Why can't you ask someone to tell you how they're... You don't always have to say, give me a price. That's the only thing I want. Say, give me a price, tell me exactly how you're doing it, what you're doing, X, Y, and Z. The sealed bid is so that nobody else can see it, right? So, I'm just guessing, but I'm not hearing it. Is that because they're dealing with proprietary ways that they go about doing this, and that's why they can't see each other's bids, or it has to be sealed?
Let me just get my city attorney's representative. He may have some additional items as far as intricacies. You want to introduce yourself, Eric?
Hi, Eric Rosenblatt, Deputy City Attorney. It's not that there's more sharing of information in an open bid. It's just that going into an open bid, the department needs to have its ways and means, methods set up in advance. There isn't the same kind of give and take that there is in a competitive sealed proposal method. There is no clear downside to a competitive sealed proposal. You're not sacrificing price. You are encouraging a free discussion of methods, and the only downside really in going this way as opposed to open bid is that this process takes longer to get started.
Very good. So this is just for moving the design build contract process forward. Talk to me a little bit about the financing. How will this be financed?
This is currently budgeted in our capital plan for the demolition of this particular work, so it is currently in our capital program, and it's been also identified in our integrated resource plan for the next 20 years as part of our overall power system planning.
So if this is subsumed somewhere in our rates, it's not a SCAPA project, just to sort of continue the thinking here. So this is, so I can really account for it when we talk about rates in the electrical side of things.
That's correct. It'll be advertised and awarded in and through LADWP's procurement process.
Got it. Okay, very good. Let's go ahead and communicate to the full council. There's no cards on the item that we approve. The department's request for authority to issue criteria of one design-build contract for the Scattergood Unit 3 demolition project that the DWP intends to let using a competitive sealed bid proposal method pursuant to Charter Section 371. Sound like a plan? All right, let's do that. All right, item number 4.
Thank you.
Item number 4 and final item. Department of Water and Power, CAO reports an ordinance relative to proposed Don A. Campbell 2 geothermal energy project, power sales agreement, and agency agreement. We have John Dennis, also with DWP, and Mark Davis with CAOs.
Now, this is a SCAPA financed project. There's a theme here today. As you make your presentation, where is this, the cost of this project? It's in the rates, and how do you get SCAPA into our rates? How do you account for whatever it is that we're using that mechanism?
Okay, John Dennis, again, Director of Power System Planning and Development. This particular project, Don Campbell 2, it is for a 16-megawatt geothermal baseload generation capacity for a 20-year power purchase agreement. Commercial operation date is scheduled for December 31st of 2016. The pricing here at $81.25 flat per megawatt hour is about 20% less than the phase 1 cost, and the beauty of this is that it's an expansion of existing operating plant. So we're enjoying the common benefits, the common systems that are there, and a lower price. So these were received, the proposals were received through an open bidding process through our renewable process there at SCAPA. This was evaluated and brought in because of it is the lowest cost, has an experienced operator. It's a best fit, so it fits our strategy for long-term strategy of coal replacement. It's a base load operation, and it's a reliable source of renewables that's not dependent on weather as some of the other renewables are, such as solar or wind. As far as the financing for this is also part of our integrated resource plan. It's part of our budgeting process. As we look at this, these particular, rather than being a capital expenditure, then it comes through our fuel and purchase power budget. So this would just look as a line item as purchased power.
Mr. Blumenfield? And how does it stack up compared to other renewables?
As far this is the least cost on the base load type generation. We look at a couple of variables as far as base load generation, and we're needing to layer in this. So we've looked at the amount of wind and solar and such, but we still need to be replacing our coal, the base load, and so this is the least cost, best fit of that base load, 24/7 type operation.
No, that's great. And is there a way to even do more of this, or are we maxing out?
Yes. The area, as far as doing more is concerned, we're just looking at different regions where the known geothermal resource areas are. So there are several different regions in the west that we're looking at. So those are opportunities we'll be bringing forward as well, even in the Salton Sea area. There's some up in the Mammoth area, some here in this location to bring in more of the geothermal.
It's solid baseload, good stuff. So in the IRP, how much more will we be expanding in baseload in this category? I mean, so this is a great step, but I forget in sort of your chart there that sort of talks about the phase out of coal and the increase. How much more capacity are we in the market for?
I don't have that right there readily as far as the geothermal either here. And let me just check to see if one of our staff member has that as far as the geothermal that we're looking at.
It's still pretty small. I think it's,
This is relatively small in the overall. I can just see some geothermal. We've got about, about 300 or so megawatts we'd like to layer in here. So this is
sure.
just a small piece of that overall part of the equation.
No, I think it's very good, and I think it's important for us, Mr. Blumenfield, as we're talking about the diversity of the portfolio. We want a good mix, but we should probably be putting more eggs in these baskets for baseload in a ranking order than maybe some other renewable resources.
Yes, so not just even in one type, but even different regions that they're
Right.
coming from. So
Right.
that'll give us the diversity of region and resource.
Very good. Without any objection, we will communicate to the full city council that we recommend the approval of the utilities request for authority to enter into a purchase PSA with SCAPA to purchase renewable geothermal energy from the Don A. Campbell II Geothermal Energy Project as specified. Hearing and seeing no public comment cards, we are adjourned.